I was 52 years old. Sarah, my wife, was 44. We spent 8 years married, but at that moment in the private room of Union Square Bank, looking up at the Manhattan ski line, I felt like I had never really met her. The room was luxurious, with dark wood paneling and the unmistakable smell of gourmet coffee. Everything there screamed status, power, and the seriousness of high-risk businesses. The manager, a man named David who had been handling my accounts for more than a decade, was sitting across from us, his computer screen open. Sarah wore a very expensive ensemble. She carried herself with a calculated arrogance, as if she had rehearsed that moment for months. And there was. She leaned on the mahogany table, bringing her face closer to the manager. Her voice was low but firm, a voice that did not admit questioning. "Transfer everything to my name," she said. "All the accounts, all the investments, the stock portfolio. I want the transfer to start now." She wasn't asking. He was ordering. I am an investment banker. My whole life has been riding over inflated egos and trading fortunes. My gut told me that she was acting like I was invisible. She acted like the wife who took control of her sick or incapacitated husband, but I was perfectly fine. The irony was brutal. She was using the supposed fragility that she herself tried to create. I was there, motionless, watching her game unfold, maintaining full control over my own reaction. I kept my face expressionless, which was easy after years of meetings on Wall Street where billions were at stake. Manager David looked at me. He was waiting for my confirmation, the nod of the head from the tired husband who would only agree with the bossy wife. Sarah laughed, a dry, low sound. She turned to me with a sneer. "He's been very unstable lately, David," she said without taking her eyes off the manager. "It's better that I manage the assets for a while for our own good." The phrase, "too unstable," was the trigger, the narrative she had been spreading about me for weeks. That the stress of work was getting to me, that I was paranoid. Her paranoia was real. Mine is not. I remembered the day I discovered the sabotage in the car. It was a trusted mechanic, an old friend, who found the clues. The brakes tampered with, the warning sensors deactivated. All planned to look like a tragic accident on the highway, another statistical fatality in the routine of a successful executive. At that moment, I stopped being a victim. I became an observer. I had changed the game without her knowing. I alerted the bank. I reviewed the documents. I reconfigured the security protocols. I had time. She wanted to hurry. I allowed her to schedule that meeting. I made her believe that it was the day of her victory, the day she would take away everything I built. I wanted the humiliation to be total, in front of witnesses and in front of security cameras. Sarah, seeing my silence, insisted, returning to speak to the manager with more force. "Don't waste time, David. Start the transfer." My husband agrees. His will already names me the only beneficiary. This is just an anticipation. Manager David typed something on the keyboard. His expression changed. The professional and calm smile disappeared. He no longer looked at me or Sarah. Hestered at the screen. Her breathing began to become shallow. She noticed the change in the air, the smell of trouble that had nothing to do with the expensive coffee. She saw his hesitation. David looked up, but not to Sarah. He looked directly at me, seeking silent confirmation. I just moved my head, a barely noticeable one. He nodded back, understood the message. He turned the monitor on the table so that Sarah could see the screen. At that moment, the silence in the room became absolute, heavy. Sarah's confident smile withered. On the screen, in large letters, was not the transfer form she expected. There was a warning. Account blocked, due to fraud risk. Investigation in progress. Her eyes widened. It was there that she understood that her greed was my main evidence. I've never been the kind of man who likes drama. My life was about numbers, predictability, and long-term strategies. I met Sarah at a charity gala event. She was stunning, 8 years younger, with an energy that seemed to complement my chronic Wall Street fatigue. I was coming from a bitter divorce. I was looking for stability, not excitement. In the early years, our marriage seemed solid. She was the perfect hostess, managing our Greenwich home and social events with a precision that I admired. I provided the comfort and financial security that she valued so much, but I was never her favorite. Not really. I was the provider, and over time, I realized that my value to her was directly tied to my net worth. The problem started when I decided to slow down. At the age of 50, after a health scare, I started talking about slowing down, maybe retiring in a few years. I wanted to travel, enjoy what I built. That's when her attitude changed. The idea that the flow of money could slow down scared her. She started to get more controlling, more questioning about my finances. His whispers in the phone became more frequent, and suddenly, I felt like an obstacle, not a partner. The apex of this change came when my lawyer suggested revising the will and creating a trust fund with more restrictive clauses to protect my estate for my children from my first marriage. Sarah didn't like it at all. She wanted unfettered access. She wanted total control without the shadow of my children. They began to hide documents, whisper behind doors. She and her lawyer, a woman who looked like something out of a courtroom movie, began to articulate the plan. I'm not naive. An investment banker learns to sniff out risk and bad faith from miles away. In the beginning, they were small things. Account statements that disappeared, weird questions about life insurance. The turning point was when I started to feel like I was being watched. It wasn't paranoia. It was professional instinct. I realized that I didn't have to win by shouting. I started my own silent audit. I hired a private investigator to monitor her communications, something my private lawyer reluctantly approved. It was the investigator who discovered the correspondence with the mechanic. The emails were cold, technical, and horrible. Specific instructions on how to disable the fault sensors on my Jaguar and tamper with the brake system so that the problem only manifested itself at high speed. The idea was clear, to look like a fatal mechanical error. That's when I took the real contract out of the bag. No, I took my contingency plan out of the drawer. Fear gave way to a calculating coldness. She not only wanted my money, she wanted my life. It took away any shred of feeling I might still have for her. At that moment, I stopped being a victim. I became an observer. I was no longer dealing with a disappointed wife. I was dealing with a criminal adversary. The game had shifted from marriage to court, from affection to evidence. And I had the advantage of knowing she was playing while she thought I was sleeping. I needed a strategic turn that wasn't just financial. I needed a turn that was public, irrefutable, and that put her exactly where she tried to put me, in a situation of total and inevitable loss. The blocking of the bank account was just the beginning. It was my way of saying without a single word, I know what you've done. And manager David, who saw the change in my gaze over the years, understood exactly what was at stake. She thought she was in a hurry. I had time, and I had the documents. What happened in the bank room was the culmination of months of psychological abuse. Sarah knew that my biggest weakness was my reputation. My name is worth more than any stock portfolio in New York. She started attacking me where I was most vulnerable. She began to hide important documents. It was joint account statements, insurance policies, even my company's paperwork. She said she was organizing the house, but in fact, she was creating documentary chaos. The whispers began behind the doors. She spoke on the phone with the lawyer, always in a low voice, and interrupted the conversation as soon as I entered the room. Their silence was more deafening than any quarrel. The abusive attitudes became more explicit. She would invite close friends to dinner and, in front of them, insinuate that I was losing my mind. She talked about my memory lapses and how I was forgetting important details of our heritage. She planted the seed of doubt. It said that I was drinking too much, or that the stress of work was driving me to paranoia. She used a sweet and worried tone of voice, which made the manipulation even more perverse. She acted like the dutiful wife who was only trying to protect her sick husband. I felt the humiliation in every look of pity that the guests gave me. They spoke as if I were invisible. I smiled, kept calm, but inside me, anger boiled. It was her preparation for the big blow, declaring myself incapable of managing my own fortune. Her escalation was clear. First, isolation. Second, public discredit. Third, total theft. She expected me to react by screaming, to lose control and confirm the unstable husband narrative. But I'm an investment banker. I don't trade with emotions. I deal with facts. I adopted the strategy of silent justice. While she was planning to take my money, I was planning my defense, which was also my attack. I had hired a cybersecurity team. They recovered all the emails she thought she had deleted. It was the detailed evidence of the plan to sabotage the car. It wasn't just greed, it was attempted murder. They wanted to hurry. I had time. I used the time to build a perfect dossier. I notarized each document, made certified copies, and stored it all in digital vaults out of Herrick. At that moment, I realized that I didn't need to win by shouting. The strength was in the cold evidence, in the irrefutable legal protocol. I didn't confront her at home. I didn't give her a chance to deny or erase any more traces. I let her think that she was winning, that she was in charge, that I was surrendered. The meeting at the bank was the perfect trap. I asked David, the manager, to make sure the security cameras were operating perfectly and that the audio recording of the room was attached to the protocol. I needed witnesses to the humiliation she imposed on me and the panic that would follow. Her injustice hurt me, but it gave me focus. I turned pain into strategy. My revenge would not be to fight. It would be to let her lose alone by her own arrogance and greed. I had to make sure that she not only lost the money, but that she faced the legal consequences of the crime she tried to commit. The bank transfer, which she demanded so arrogantly, was the final proof of her intention to defraud, added to the attempt to physically eliminate me. I let her schedule the meeting, with a date and time. I let her prepare the suit and the speech. I let her taste the victory. I wanted her to fall from as high as possible, and that luxurious bench was the perfect stage for his fall. The silence in the bank's private room became something physical, almost solid, as if oxygen had been sucked up by an industrial exhaust fan. Sarah stared at the monitor, her eyes wide, her thin hands squeezing the sides of the leather armchair. The red error message glowed like an open wound in the middle of the flawless paperwork. I saw the exact moment when her confidence, that armor of arrogance she put on in the morning, began to crack from top to bottom. She tried to babble something, but her voice failed, leaving only a dry sound, as if there was sand in her throat. Manager David didn't back down. He remained motionless, his hands on the table, waiting. Sarah turned to me, her face pale, a shadow of despair crossing her features. She tried to smile, a nervous, forced movement that didn't reach the eye. "David, what is this? There must be some error in the system, some technical misunderstanding," she said, trying to regain a tone of authority. I didn't respond right away. I just watched her. At that moment, I stopped being a victim and became an observer. I've seen the woman I've shared my life with for the past few years turn into a complete stranger, a predator cornered by her own trap. She spoke to the manager again, her voice rising an octave, charged with a hysterical urgency. She demanded that he call the switchboard, restart the computer, do anything to get the money flowing into her hands. It was then that I took from my leather briefcase the real contract, or rather, the dossier that I had been secretly assembling. I placed the papers on the mahogany table with a calmness that seemed to irritate her even more. "There's no mistake, Sarah," I said, my voice coming out low and steady, the tone of someone who closes a multi-billion-dollar deal without hesitation. "The account is blocked because I requested the block exactly 48 hours ago, after presenting evidence of attempted fraud and risk to life to the bank's compliance department." What she didn't know was that I didn't just go to the bank. I had gone to the Manhattan 19th Precinct and spoken to detectives who deal with financial crimes and attempted murders. They had agreed, but I had the documents. I handed the manager and Sarah a copy of the Jaguar Mechanics technical report. The document detailed in detail how the brake cables had been manually worn out and how the collision warning system had been electronically disabled. Sarah looked at the paper as if it were on fire. She tried to deny it, said it was my invention, that I was trying to incriminate her because she wanted a divorce without paying alimony. But I had more. I had her cell phone location records, which showed that she had been to the underground auto repair shop in Brooklyn 3 times in the past 2 weeks, at times when she claimed to be at Pilates or charity meetings. With each word of mine, the air in the room seemed to get heavier. Manager David pulled a discreet button under the desk. I knew what that meant. The bank's security and the police, who were already on alert, would be notified that the fraud suspect was present and in flagrant attempt to embezzle funds. Sarah began to tremble. She realized that the armored room, which she thought was the site of her triumph, was nowhere cell. She tried to get up, claiming that she was feeling sick and that she needed to leave, but the manager politely asked her to remain seated until the situation was clarified. I kept talking, describing how I tracked every transfer she tried to make to hidden accounts in tax havens in the previous weeks. I was a banker, after all. Tracking money was what I did better than anything else in the world. She thought I was just an absent-minded husband, but I was the man who knew every penny and every bit of information circulating in our financial lives. I explained to her, right there, in front of the manager, that the contingency plan she tried to activate My accidental death to inherit everything had been the catalyst for her own ruin. I had already revoked all the powers of attorney, changed the beneficiaries of the life insurance, and moved most of the capital to protection funds that she didn't even know existed. The humiliation was total. She was there, dressed in $10,000 worth of designer clothes, but without a single penny in her pocket that she could call her own. The bank's monitor continued to display the criminal investigation alert. Those red letters were the verdict. I saw the tears of anger start to run down her face, smudging the expensive makeup. She didn't cry with regret. She cried because she had been caught. She cried because she realized that the 52-year-old man she tried to dismiss as a nuisance was the same man who had just destroyed every future possibility she had imagined for herself. When the door to the room opened and two uniformed police officers entered, accompanied by the bank's head of security, Sarah collapsed. She started screaming, accusing me of everything, saying I was a monster. I just stood up, closed my briefcase, and looked at it one last time. There was no hatred in me, just the cold satisfaction of someone who executed a complex operation with absolute success. She tried to steal everything from me, including my life. But now she would discover that the price of greed is the total loss of freedom. The officers escorted her out of the room. She still tried to scream, but her voice no longer had the strength it used to. It was just an empty and desperate sound. Manager David closed the door with a professional calm and turned to me. He didn't have to say anything. His look was one of respect and understanding. He had witnessed the fall of someone he thought was above the law and morals. There, on that luxurious bench, was the most expensive lesson she could have learned about the power of discretion. She wanted visibility. She wanted the glamour of easy fortune. I wanted silent justice, and I got it. Fooling a man is easy. It is difficult to beat a man who has woken up. She counted on my predictable routine, on my fatigue from work. She forgot that in the world of finance, betrayal is just another risk to be managed and mitigated. And I'm an expert in risk mitigation. Her ambition was her own perdition. She didn't just try to steal the money. She tried to steal my life. This elevated the dispute from a civil divorce to a serious criminal case. She's crossed the line, and when you cross the line with a man who knows every article of law and every banking protocol, you're bound to lose. My revenge was not to fight. It was to let her lose alone. I didn't have to raise my voice or make accusations in front of everyone. I only presented the irrefutable, cold technical proof at the moment when it felt most invincible. At that moment, as I watched the trail of her panic, I realized that the money she wanted to steal was not her real fortune. The real fortune was the time I gained, the control I held, and the freedom she just lost. She thought the will was the end point. Little did she know that I had already rewritten history long before she scheduled that meeting at the bank. I had modified the family trust structures, ensuring that even if she succeeded in some secondary legal maneuver, the core of my estate would be shielded. Sometimes the best answer is written in a notary's office. I kept calm in silence. I let her greed make her make bigger and bigger mistakes. They spoke as if I were invisible. I used this invisibility to move through the shadows, collecting the evidence of his attempted sabotage and deception. Justice did not need a spectacle. She needed patience and proof. They had greed. I had the documents. Now she would have to face the consequences in a legal system that doesn't care about her social status or her designer clothes. She would have to explain why she had met with a clandestine mechanic to tamper with the brakes of my car, and why days later, she tried to transfer all my money. The evidence was connected and undeniable. I knew my life would be calmer from that day on. The threat had been neutralized. I could finally think about slowing down and enjoying the life she tried to steal from me. The peace that came with that account block was worth more than the entire portfolio. The game is over for her. For me, the next phase of life was just beginning, free from the poison of greed. Block 6, CTA, emotional question. I stood up, shook hands with the manager, and walked off the bench. The Manhattan sun was bright, but for the first time in months, I felt the fresh air in my lungs. Sarah tried to take it all from me with a stroke of a pen, after trying to physically eliminate me. She forced me to act. If it were you, after discovering the sabotage, would you have confronted her at home, or would you have waited for the perfect moment on the bench, letting her fall on her own?